Jeff here. I'm loving doing this series because I've just taken all 3 decades of experience and have written a lot of papers and stuff, and a lot of thinking about and doing chapters of books and stuff that I haven't written yet, and kind of putting them to some thoughts here, and a lot of them focus on this whole thing of quality because it's really a key thing. And so I'm gonna have a lot of these little videos in a specific order to help us begin to look at this. The thing I want to talk about here is an evaluation criteria that I created back in the early 1990s. I would say 1991, 1992 is when I created it. Um, Maybe as early as 1990, sometime in those 2 years there, because uh, because I, as a linguist, and not just as a language teacher, but I'm a linguist. And I always had this perspective of sociolinguistics as being there is no such thing as perfect and ap- it's appropriate, right? So I had always had this approach in my early years of learning linguistics, and from 1990 to 1990, let's say 1990 1994, I always had this approach that was very sociolinguistics approach to language learning, and that there is no perfect form. There's no right or wrong. It's just as appropriate or not, and that can vary. So I'm going to explain a kind of a grid that I did, and I don't have an example of this. I probably took them to the U.S. and I never shipped them back. I don't remember where I got these. I probably have some box up in my attic, right? Of when I would evaluate students, I did this in France. I'm pretty sure I did this in France in first at the University of Lyon, and I took this to other universities. I don't think that I had it back in Portland State yet when I taught there. Um, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, it goes back 30 years here. And what I did was, because from linguistics point of view, I know that the sounds, lots of sounds, and phonology is kind of phonology. I mean, you got to learn all those sounds too when you're learning another language, and it depends on the specific situations where the sounds impact one another, right? And so what I did was I taught language. I remember teaching at the University of Lyon and teaching all these. I had like several groups of students of like 20, 30 students each. So I probably had, 50 to 100 students 1 year. And then I was dealing actually with I was teaching individuals at one of the business language schools too, or several of them, but, and kind of a sequence. And I went to Paris the following year. I actually taught only at the business language school. And so I was teaching there. And the, the thing that I would do is I try to be very objective in my criteria of how I note people's notes. And I remember I was doing a lot of exams and stuff because the students were like taking tests a lot and stuff. And so I would make, I want to make it really simple and easy for everyone to kind of do their evaluation of what they were doing and their language learning. And so what I did is I created a grid, an evaluation grid of language learning. And when I would do the oral exams, they would have them do an oral exam with me. Every person that come through me. I didn't have just a single general note, which some people just give a general note and do that. But I created a grid. I created this evaluation criteria, and the different things I was evaluating in this were I was separating between. Um, I made the difference between, like, I had one category called phonetics and phonology. So what I would do is I didn't have a scale to start with. What I had is I had a thing where I'd take notes, okay? And what I would do is every single time when I'm doing an oral exam with someone, they're doing an oral exam, I would every time that they made a mistake, I would note, okay? And depending on how many bad marks they got, right? Then I'd give a grade to it, right? Kind of an average. Um, so if they've made very few pronunciation mistakes, you know, mistakes, then they got a better grade. If they made lots of pronunciation mistakes, then that part of the evaluation just we get a note, right? Kind of a grade. Then I had one on grammar. Okay, so do the words go together or not? The words that they're saying here, because it's different than pronunciation. Pronunciation can be perfect. You get perfect pronunciation, but actually a bad word order, right? Or, and I don't want to say bad word order. I'm going to call this syntax and morphology. So, affixes, all the affixes, suffixes, prefixes, all that, plus the sentence order, I'll call this grammar morphology. And those would have a separate note, a separate grade, right? So every time they made a mistake on something, just put a point down, and then count them up and say, average it out, right? Then I had one on fluency. Now, fluency, you can actually pronounce things really bad and actually have really bad syntax, but you can sound fluent, okay? You can sound fluent. Or you can, you can really do really bad and or not, you can do this both ways. You can be really poor fluent but have really good pronunciation, right? Or I know lots of people that are that way. They're not going to sound fluent, but they're going to have really exact words, right? And they're going to be perfect, but they can sound kind of like they're going to stumble as they're going, right? But they have actual words, they're accurate. Then I had another category. So I talked about phonology, syntax, fluency. Then I had one called understanding. Now, understanding is the idea of, if I ask you a question and you answer a different question, I'm still going to grade you on that. But I'm not going to give you a bad grade because you answered the wrong question, because you might actually have good fluency and good pronunciation and good grammar. You just answered the wrong question, right? So if I ask the question, what's your name? And you answer with, it's very beautiful, it's kind of nice weather out today. You're going to get now, you can have great grammar and great, you can have great grammar, great pronunciation, all that. But the fact that you answer the wrong question gives you a bad note or bad mark in the understanding part. You didn't understand what I was talking about. But you know the kinds of things that you would talk about. So it means that you know what it is, you just answered the wrong question, right? So I'd have these different criteria of coming to a final overall note or grade, right? And so, it took me about just probably 5-10 to kind of go through this, and I finally got going, industrialized the whole thing. It worked really, really well because I was able to actually, I think I had to end up with 4 or 5 of these things. I had just a piece of paper and I just photocopied. And I would just put the name of the student and I'd take marks, boom, 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 boom. And I have all the ones I heard that were wrong, and I kind of give them a note, a grade for each subsection, and I give an overall note. It was really fast for me. And I take notes on it. Every time they took a note, boom, write the word down that they pronounced wrong. It went really, really fast. It was really, really it was a very helpful thing. And it got me in that thing to give them a note that was an appreciation note or something. It was more kind of global, but it broke down things. So people can, if they really understood really well, but pronounced kind of really bad, really crappy pronunciation, at least they gave them something that wasn't just bad because they understood. Or if somebody pronounced, the other way, if they don't understand, they're understanding. If they're not understanding and they're pronouncing it real good, you separate these things. And so but in the end, I would have this kind of overall thing that would actually favor, depending if they were understanding or not, right? Because communication in the end is, you can pronounce all you want, but if you're not understanding what it is, you're not understanding what the thing is, it can be kind of be embarrassing, right? So I had this evaluation grid that covered these things. And I think back then it was probably between 5 and 10, right? 5 and 10, the grade numbers or the kind of points that I would do. And I was able to do that depending on how many points I would dock off by actually how many times I pronounced something, incorrectly or stuff. So I think that's a really important thing when you're doing these evaluations of, language technologies, is how is it done by a language teacher that kind of deals with this in every day and is able to grade this way. And I think that really helped me get an overall picture that wasn't just always bad, because it should always be bad if the people don't pronounce really great, right? But the reality is some people, they have pronunciation, they have grammar, or they have all these different things, and they're good at some things, not good at others. But it doesn't mean they're all bad, right? Because what happens is You can make it seem everything seem bad just because they got one of the things off that you think is important. But really, what you have to say is these are all equal parts, right? And then you have to decide what is your primary criterion to making that final grade, right? So it makes it very objective. I try to make this objective for the grading of the students, and I think that that was really helpful. And I think we need to take this idea and bring this over to the language technologies and kind of use it in similar ways, saying, are people just listening, or are they having to actually produce? And this is what we're missing, or we're missing a lot of this in our evaluation techniques. Because we're looking at scores of big data, right? Which don't show these things. The big data scores are really focusing on the probability of this thing, which is all kind of just a probability thing rather than the knowledge is actually creating this, right? In an innate way. So I think this is a really important thing to do. Is to consider what are your evaluation criteria that you can set as these. Is it understandable? Is it how would you evaluate this? What are your criteria? What are your various criteria? And what are the kind of the ranges that you're going to give this? And how many times you're going to knock it off? And this comes hand in when you're doing like post editing. It's just how many things do you get in each of the categories? I'm going to come to that one in the next video about some of the kind of the evaluation metrics that have been used along these ways, or that kind of correspond to some of this and don't always. So that will be the next video. But this one was basically on, kind of overall more holistic, evaluation criteria. Okay. So let's get to the other ones on the other kind of methods.